Welcome back. Uh, Today we are going to start discussing digestive system. So I have divided the digestive system in two parts. So we'll start with the first part in which we will talk about the anatomy of the digestive system. So let's start. So the learning objectives for this lecture is going to be um, we are going to have an overview of digestive system, what it does, what is the digestive process. We'll also talk about the digestive system organs and what are their relationships between one another, and then the functional anatomy of the digestive system. So digestive system, one can consider it is a system which is kind of like a disassembly in the factories. That means you start with a larger substance and then you start breaking it into smaller chunks and chunks to a point in which our body breaks food and then breaks it into smaller parts. We all know that anything we eat is made up of macromolecules, and those macromolecules, recall, are four types. We have carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay, so everything is made up of these four macromolecules, and each macromolecule is made up of smaller units. Okay, so in digestive system, when whatever food we eat, they are made up of these macromolecules. Our body breaks down it into those smaller molecules, monomers, what we call. Okay, so that our body cells can absorb them, and then the cells can synthesize the macromolecules they need from the same things. Okay, so let's start with the digestive system. So digestive system is made up of two major groups of organs. So we call one of this, we call it as alimentary canal, or what we call as a GI tract. Okay, so and in this one, in the GI tract, and the second one is the accessory digestive organs, which helps in the digestive system in doing what its function is. So let's look at what is in the GI tract. So the GI tract starts from the mouth. So the mouth cavity is here. So it starts from the mouth and it goes to the anus. So it's kind of a long tubular structure present, which is it's a tubular structure, so it's both ends are open. Okay, so the mouth is open and the anus is open too. So what is the major function of the digestive system? As I mentioned, that it is the major function is that it's gonna digest the food and then absorb the nutrients out of it, which we can then utilize to make ATP. Okay, other parts of the major GI canal is your um, pharynx, which is this region here, and then long tubular structure, which is esophagus. Then we have stomach, and then we have small intestine, which is further divided into different parts. So the central portion here is the small intestine, and this has the duodenum, which is this C-shaped structure right here at the end of the stomach, and it's just like a C-shaped structure. Then we have jejunum, which is the small intestine, and then towards the end it is called ileum, and from ileum it goes and is connected to what we call as large intestine, and the area which is right next to the ileum and is joined to the ileum is known as cecum. And then we see this large intestine, it comes towards the upwards or superiorly. This is known as the ascending colon. So the large intestine is also known as colon. So this is ascending colon, and then we have transverse colon, which is in the transverse plane in our abdominal cavity, and then it has a descending colon, and from there actually it goes into an S shape backwards. So it's from the front going towards the back side, posterior side, what we call as the sigmoid colon, ending into rectum and then the anal canal. Okay, so these are the major organs which we say belongs to the GI tract, or we call it as a gastrointestinal uh, tract. The accessory organs which assist the digestive system includes teeth in our mouth cavity or buccal cavity, which helps to chew the material. And then we have the tongue, which is this tongue, and then we have couple of couple of glands. So one of those glands is the parotid glands. Other one which is underneath the tongue is sublingual gland, and then we have on the sides of the mandible, near the mandible, is the submandibular gland. So together these are called the salivary glands. We also have other glands and organs. One of the other gland is your pancreas, part of this. Okay, so these are larger organs, and then we also have liver. Okay, so the liver is there too, and the part of the liver is the gallbladder. So the liver synthesizes is bile, and we'll talk about what is bile. We also have number of small glands which are scattered around, or sometimes they are unicellular glands present in the stomach, in the small intestine, etc., and also even in the colon. So those are present, but the major large glands is your salivary glands, liver, and the pancreas. Okay. Okay, so let's now discuss what are some of the activities which GI tract, or other we can call as digestive system, does. Okay, so there are 6 essential activities which the GI tract does. Number 1 is the ingestion, ingesting the food. Second is propulsion. Okay, means pushing the food through this long tubular structure. Okay, and pushing propulsion is first is swallowing, which has a different way during the pharynx region here, when we swallow the food in the pharynx region. And then the second part to it is what we call as peristalsis. So peristalsis is movement inside the tube structure. Okay, the third major thing is digestion, means breaking down of the food into the components what we can actually absorb. And these are your mechanical uh, digestion, and then we also have chemical digestion. So in a mechanical digestion, another kind of movement comes to what we call as segmentation, and we'll discuss it a little bit later. Okay, so in mechanical, we break down the food literally. Mechanically means you're breaking it, like your mouth when we chew food is breaking it down. Okay, and in a chemical, we break the molecules, the macromolecules, into smaller molecules. So that's the major difference. The this is the that is the uh, fourth activity. The fifth activity is absorption. When our body cells, the cells which line up our intestine or GI tract, especially in the small intestine, starts absorbing, starts transporting things inside them, and then from them to the blood. Okay, so that's the part of the absorption. And then defecation is the part whatever is not digestible in our body cannot break it, and that is then released through the digestive tract. Okay, so these are the 6 GI tract activities, and which helps us to absorb the nutrients. Now let's discuss what is peristalsis and what is segmentation and what's their differences. So in a peristalsis, what happens is the GI tract, the adjacent parts of this long tubular structure actually uh, constrict, and they keep moving the food forwards. So the bolus is the bite you take, and when you swallow one, when you take a bite in your mouth, and then you chew, and then our mouth makes it kind of round, your tongue helps to swallow it. That's called the bolus. So it's moving that bolus into this tubular structure by constricting the adjacent areas of that tube. It's similar if you have a very long sock and you put a ball in it and you push the ball to the other end. Okay, so it's that way is known as the peristalsis. Okay, so in segmentation, what our digestive system tract or GI tube does is it mixes up things. So in here, the non-adjacent areas actually contract and then relax. So what it does is it moves the things a little forward and then makes them back. So it's kind of movement occurring. Say for example, you have this set, and then the middle portion will contract here. So half of this is gonna go to the previous one and mix it up with that. Okay, so and then it mixes up and goes down. All right, here are a few questions. Okay, uh, you can check your understanding with them and name them, and again try to answer them from your memory, not from your looking at the notes. Okay. All right, now let's talk about where are these digestive system organs present. So majority of the GI tract organs are present in your abdominopelvic cavity. Okay, so and remember and recall from your AMP1 part that our abdominal cavity has it's in the ventral cavities of the body, and all these cavities on the ventral side of your body have serous membranes. Okay, so that serous membranes are named differently in different regions. For example, in the thoracic region, we have the pleural cavities, we have the pericardial cavity, which holds the heart, and in the abdominopelvic region, or in the abdomen, we call it as peritoneum. So the peritoneum is the serous membrane which is lining the abdominal cavity. The abdominal cavity so has two of these serous membranes. They're actually continuation of one another. One is the visceral peritoneum. So visceral peritoneum is going to touch the visceral organs. Okay, say for example, if this is the alimentary canal organs, which is a tube-like structure, and this is a transverse section, so that's why we see it. And this is your abdominopelvic cavity, the round structure, and the back side is the posterior and dorsal cavity which holds the spinal cord, and in the front region is this orange color line is your peritoneum. So the visceral peritoneum is the one which is going to touch the organs, and then the parietal peritoneum is going to line up the cavity. Okay, so this is the parietal peritoneum. In between is the space which is known as the peritoneum cavity. Okay, peritoneal cavity. And this one actually is filled with serous fluid. The reason for the serous fluid is there to decrease friction. Okay, so when there is no friction present, your GI tract organs can move. If the serous fluid is not there, and when they move around, that's going to cause friction, and that can cause inflammation and pain in the body. Okay, so the peritoneal cavity is between these two peritoneum layers. Okay, another thing which we want to talk about is what is known as the mesentery. Okay, in the digestive tract, especially in the abdominopelvic cavity, we have couple of mesenteries. And what are these? The mesenteries are double layers of this serous membrane, what we call as uh, peritoneum. Okay, and mesenteries contain what? The mesentery contains blood vessels. They also contain lymphatic vessels, and they also have nerves. Okay, the mesenteries hold this all the organs in place, and mesenteries also can have a lot of fat stored in there too. Okay, in the abdominal region, we have two types of mesenteries. One is towards the dorsal side. That means that mesentery is peritoneal layer. It's a sac of peritoneum layer which is attached to the posterior wall of your abdominal cavity. Okay, so you have dorsal mesenteries. So remember, this is the posterior side of the body and this is the anterior side. Okay, so the dorsal mesentery is attached to the posterior wall of the abdominal cavity. Then we also have some organs present in the ventral mesentery. Ventral mesenteries will be attached to the frontal portion of the abdominal cavity wall. Okay, so that's something to remember. Okay, then some of the organs of the digestive tract are known as retroperitoneal organs. What do we mean by this? So retroperitoneal organ is, that means these organs are not present inside the peritoneal layer. They are behind the peritoneum. So that's why we call them retroperitoneal. Kidneys are retroperitoneal. Part of your ascending and descending colon, your pancreas, and your even part of your duodenum is a retroperitoneal. They move towards the back side. Okay. Then we also have number of organs which are actually enclosed inside this peritoneal layers between the two of them, and these are called intraperitoneal organs, and they are surrounded by this peritoneum. Okay. Okay, so let's go over this picture, and this may actually help you to understand and visualize it in your mind. So when we are looking at this is a cadaver picture. So what you see on this side is the right side here is the largest is the liver. Okay, so liver is there, and there are different lobes of livers, and we'll talk about that, and they're held by this connective tissue a membrane, or which is known as falciform ligament. Okay, you see this cloud-like little sheet-like structure and has a fat inside it, this portion. This actually is known as greater omentum. Okay, so these are layers of peritoneum, and it's kind of a omentum means it's an apron, it is falling at the front. Okay, so this is the greater omentum. And then when you flip it backwards, so in this picture we have flipped it backwards to look underneath. What is hiding underneath is actually small intestine is gonna be there too. It's underneath it. And then if you remove the small intestine too in here, which has been removed, you see another uh, membrane structure which holds the large intestine together. Okay, so now the different regions of this membrane like structure, which is this mesentery, we call it, it's kind of peritoneum, has different names. Okay, so for example, the one which touches the transverse colon between here is known as the transverse mesocolon. Okay, then we have the one which is touching near the sigmoid colon is known as the sigmoid mesocolon. Okay, so this is the sigmoid. And then just near the jejunum, which is this portion is there. So this we only call as the mesentery. Okay, so looking at this picture, we described some of the mesenteries, and the greater omentum has been taken upwards. Now, if you also do not remove the small intestine and just pull the liver upwards, then you see another flap of membrane here. which actually connects the liver to the stomach. So this is the stomach, and this portion is known as lesser omentum. Okay, then we have the duodenum. Then we also have the duodenum. Then we have the jejunum is there, and the small intestine, and then of course we have the colon, and the portion near the jejunum is known as the cecum region. Okay, and in the cecum you see this small tiny tube-like structure. This actually is the appendix. Okay, this picture just gives you a different view. It gives you a sagittal view, and showing you how things are connected. Okay, so let's look at this. So if you look at this this peritoneum membrane, uh, the outermost layer which is present is the parietal. So here is the parietal peritoneum. It is going to touch the wall. So I'm just going to change the color of the um, pen so it's different than other colors. So this is the parietal. This green line is the parietal peritoneum because it follows along the wall of the abdominal cavity. Okay, and then it turns into, part of it is then enclosed and is touching the organs, so that then it becomes into the visceral peritoneum. Okay, so if you look at this, this is the liver, and in liver is enclosed here, and then you can say the stomach is here, and then duodenum is coming at this place, and then transverse colon is there, and this is all jejunum and ileum present. Okay, here. So this gives you an overall picture of what are the mesenteries present in our abdominal cavity. Let's move forward. All right, let's discuss one of the most common homeostatic imbalance, which is found involving the peritoneum layers. It's called peritonitis. It is the inflammation of the peritoneum and can be caused by stabbing wounds, also can be caused by perforating ulcers or ruptured appendix. And you probably have heard about it or seen someone who has suffered from it. So what happens is, in here is when it is ruptured, the bacteria gets in, the two peritoneal layers will stick together, and you have a localized infection which can actually spread very fast to your whole body, because remember the peritoneums have blood supply in them, and it can be extremely dangerous and lethal. And requires the surgical intervention. So the surgeons have to go inside and wash the whole peritoneal cavity, as well as the treatment with very, very strong antibiotics is required. All right, so now let's talk about the blood supply to the digestive or GI tract. And especially in the abdominal region only first. Okay, so in the abdominal region we have all the blood supply, the arterial blood supply is coming from the aorta. Okay, so the major ones which includes is your celiac arteries, and we also have superior mesenteric arteries, we also have inferior mesenteric arteries, and also hepatic as well as splenic. Okay, uh, arteries, the stomach has its own arteries, which is gastric arteries there. Okay, another important blood supply which is present in the abdominal region is what we call as hepatic portal circulation. In a hepatic portal circulation this is the venous blood which is coming from the small intestine or small intestine portion, which brings in nutrient rich blood from the digestive tracts to the liver, and then the liver processes it, and then the blood returns to the inferior vena cava. Okay, so this is the hepatic portal circulation. Okay, let's look at this. We did cover this blood circulations in chapter 19 when we were talking about the blood vessels. So I would like you to review these because this can be part of your lab exam. Okay, so let's look at this. So this blue vessel is what? This blue vessel is your inferior vena cava coming, and here is your stomach. So let's just first identify the organs we have in this picture. This is liver, which is cut off, and then we have gallbladder here, and then this is the spleen. Okay, and in here the celiac trunk, and we are looking at the celiac trunk. So the celiac trunk is a large trunk here which divides immediately into two parts. So the common hepatic artery, which is going towards the liver, so this portion is the common hepatic artery, and then second portion is the what we call as the splenic artery. Okay, and then the common hepatic artery becomes the hepatic artery proper a little bit further, and then it also divides it into this region, this one, which is your gastroduodenal artery. It's gonna give blood to the duodenum, and also turns into one of the branch comes out of the common hepatic artery is the right gastric artery, which then goes and goes around this the lesser curvature of the stomach upwards, and then comes back. Okay, so anastomosis is found in here. So this then it turns into what we call as the left gastric artery, so the anastomosis. The splenic artery is going behind the stomach, and it goes goes into the spleen. Okay, the artery which was the the right gastric artery, and then behind it, which was the gastroduodenal artery, one of the branch of the gastroduodenal artery is the right epiploic artery, which then travels along the greater curvature of the stomach, and then eventually actually anastomizes with the splenic artery. So, and one of the branch here we see behind the stomach, which is the superior mesenteric artery, comes very close from the abdominal aorta. It comes out just below that of the celiac trunk. Okay, so the major arteries is the celiac trunk and its divisions. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember about this blood supply. Now here in this picture, let's review this picture. This picture we have removed the superficial organs. That means your stomach, your liver, etc. has been removed. Okay, so what do we see? Remember, this was the celiac trunk we discussed. Just underneath here is the superior mesenteric artery coming out. Okay, the major branches of superior mesenteric artery again are gonna anastomizes between themselves. Is the first one is the middle colic artery. So this middle colic artery is gonna supply the blood to the colon, this middle portion of the intestines. Okay, and then we also have intestinal arteries coming out from there, which are going to go to small intestine. Then we also have one of the branch which is part of this middle colic artery is the right coliac artery, is gonna go and supply blood to your ascending large intestine, or which we call as ascending colon. Okay, we also have one of the major branch coming downwards, which is known as the ileocolic artery. The ileocolic artery goes and supplies the blood to the iliac region of the ileocecal region, which is the junction between the ileum and the colon, what we call the ileoceliac region. On the left side, we see the inferior mesenteric artery coming out of the abdominal aorta, and it also branches quite a bit, and then gives you left colic artery, which goes and anastomizes with that of the middle colic artery, and then also gives out sigmoidal arteries, which are going to supply the blood to the sigmoidal colon. And also we have one more artery coming out, which is going to go and supplies blood to that of the rectum. So that is the superior rectal arteries. Okay, so please remember about this picture. In your lab exam, you can be asked about questions on this because we are only covering the digestive system. Okay, and again, the thing to remember about here is that the superior and the inferior mesenteric arteries, although we have number of different branches coming out of them, but they all anastomose, means they all connect together again. Okay, this picture reviews the venal system, or what we call as the hepatic portal circulation. So let's look at some of the organs which are in this picture. And again, in this one we have removed the stomach so we can have a better view of the hepatic portal system. So the hepatic portal system brings in the blood, nutrient rich blood, and it brings it towards the liver. Okay, so which is the main hepatic portal vein. Okay, so in any portal vein you have actually two types of blood capillary beds. Okay, so that's the difference between the normal veins and the arteries, is the portal system will have two blood capillary systems. So looking at this light picture behind is your this is your superior vena cava, and looking at this, so from the intestine, this portion is the small intestine. Remember the ileocecal region, this is the cecum region of the large intestine. This is the sigmoidal region, that's the ascending colon. Transverse colon has been cut off, and this is the descending colon. So the veins which bring in the blood from the small intestine is through your superior mesenteric veins, which is one of them is this large vein. We also have inferior mesenteric veins bringing the blood, and also the right gastroepiploic. Remember, this was right gastroepiploic artery, so it's easier to remember those. There was a splenic artery, so we have splenic vein, which is going to bring the blood from the spleen. And remember, the gastric arteries were there. There was a right and left one, so there is the gastric veins are present. So they all combine together, they bring the blood, and they form what is known as the hepatic portal vein. Then the hepatic portal vein goes into the liver, which is right here. So you can see this going in here, and then it brings the blood and divides profusely inside the liver, and then the liver utilizes all the nutrients, and then whatever is nutrient less blood is then changes into and merges together out of the liver as what we call as the hepatic veins. So the liver has two types of vein. One is the hepatic portal veins, which are bringing the nutrient rich blood to the liver, and the other is the hepatic veins, which are coming out of the liver. Okay. Okay, so now let's talk about the histology of the GI tract, or what we call as the alimentary canal. So there are four basic layers or tunics present. Okay, so going from inside to outwards, so we are moving from inside to outwards in this direction. We have the mucosal layer, submucosal layer, muscularis externa, and we have serosa. Okay, so the mucosal layer inside right here. Okay, so if you look into this, it has a lumen, it's the opening. So this is the lumen, and the lumen is lined with a single layer of cells, or at certain places we will talk about is there is stratified squamous epithelium too. So this layer is the epithelium layer. This is single layer right here we see, and at certain places it dips down into the submucosal layer to where we have the glands. Okay, so and those glands are going to fall out of the outside the alimentary canal. Remember, recall that epithelium tissue always requires some kind of support underneath it, and that support is of connective tissue membrane, and that is called lamina propria. Okay, so that is a lamina propria, and surrounding the lamina propria is what we have, what we see. So this whole thing is the lamina propria, this, okay, connective tissue membrane. Surrounding the lamina propria is a small layer of muscles, this red one. Okay, so that is known as the muscularis mucosae because it is associated with the mucus part or mucosa part, rather than we'll say it correctly like that. Scattered in this connective tissue lamina propria, you will see a couple of other things. One is this green color stuff. This is the malt. This is the mucosal associated lymphoid tissue. Okay, you will also see some glands. Okay, so these are the glands in the mucosa. Okay, so that's the mucosal layer. Okay, so then we have the submucosa. Okay, so the submucosa is this thick part. Which is surrounding that portion. Okay. What do you see in this submucosa? You see number of glands present in there. You also see blood vessels, these red color and blue color, and then you also see green color vessels. These are lymphatic vessels. Okay, and in here they're showing in this picture right here, they're coming out of it. Apart from them, you also see lots of these yellow lines. What are those? These are actually nerves, and they form plexus. Now recall, plexus is when nerves branch and then they come together again as one. So these are submucosal nerve plexus. Okay. When we move out of the submucosa, we look at is what is known as muscularis externa. So the muscularis externa is this layer, and it has two layers of smooth muscle cells. One is the circular layer, which is going to be, if this is the tube, it's going to be like this. If the second is the longitudinal layer, which is going to be along the length of the tube. Okay, so those are the two layers. And then you also see in between those two layers, you see blood vessels. You also see nerves present there. Okay, so those are there too. And this kind of nerve system actually is known as myenteric nerve plexus. Okay, and then outside is the serosa membrane. Remember, the serosa will have two layers. One will be connective tissue layer, and then inside is the epithelium, mesothelium region. Okay, so now this was a nutshell and description of all the four basic tunics. Okay, so they're generally present everywhere in the digestive tract, but at certain places we will see it may be modified a little bit. Okay, in the stomach especially. Okay, so let's look at again repetition. Mucosa. Mucosa has lumen. So this is the mucosa, has a lumen, has the mucous epithelium present. Lamina propria is there. Then we have a small smooth muscle cells called muscularis mucosa. Okay, now let's look at what is these epithelium layers. So the epithelium is typically simple columnar epithelium, and they have lots and lots of goblet cells in them, mucus secreting cells present in them. So they secrete mucus, and mucus is formed by what? A protein called mucin, which is absorbed by the which dissolves into water and then becomes the slimy mucus. Okay, They may also secrete many enzymes, as well as some of these epithelium cells are modified, and we call them enteroendocrine cells, and they will secrete the hormones, especially in the stomach as well as in the small intestine. Okay, so those hormones function or act locally and activate these other glands inside the stomach or the small intestine, and they secrete the enzymes or even acid in the stomach. Okay, in the lamina propria, the lamina propria is a loose areolar connective tissue. As I discussed earlier too, it has blood vessels in it. So those blood vessels bring the new nourishment to the alimentary canal, and they also participate in absorption, and this is typically by the veins. Okay, and scattered around we also see that they have malt, which is in this picture is shown as lymph nodes. So the malt is the place, as we discussed in the lymphoid system, or when we did lymphatic system in the unit 2, is where the first time the B and the T cells come across the limited amount of antigens, and they become activated. So, and also have lots of activated lymphocytes too, or we can say white blood cells, which are there to act as a defensive cells in case there is any bacteria which has actually adhered to the epithelium of the lumen and has somehow got inside into these inside the lamina propria. So they are the defense cells present in there. Okay, and the muscularis mucosa is a smooth muscle cells layer, and this actually helps to keep things moving in the mucosa, which is kind of mucus movement, etc. It's looking at the submucosa. This is again areolar connective tissue and has a lot of blood vessels and lymph vessels, and also have lymphoid follicles scattered around, and those lymphoid follicles will be just individual follicles present around, and again for the defense. They also have a lot of nerve supply, which we call as the submucosal nerve plexus. The muscularis externa is a little bit thick. Okay, and this is the one which is responsible for any movement, larger movement of your GI tract. This is your segmentation or peristalsis. Okay, so it has two layers. The inner layer is circular layer. Look at this layer. It has the muscle fibers are in this direction, they are circular, and then we have one which is the longitudinal layer is present. So circular layer at certain places in our digestive tract or GI tract actually becomes very thickened, and they form what we call as sphincters. For example, we have the esophageal stomach sphincter is there, and at the end of the stomach we have pyloric sphincter, and then we also have at the joint of iliac and colon ileocecal sphincter is there. Anus itself is a sphincter, but we will talk about the structure of that. Okay, and between these two layers we have lots and lots of nerves which actually form plexus, and those nerves are known as myenteric nerve plexus. Now pay attention to the spelling. It is not mesenteric. Okay, so it is myenteric. So know that the difference. Okay, now let's look at the serosa, which is the outermost layer. So the serosa is actually the connective tissue membrane, and you will have, this is actually what? This is the connective tissue membrane, and it is actually visceral peritoneum, because remember the parietal peritoneum is touching the wall, the cavity wall, and this is again areolar connective tissue, and it is lined with cells inside which are modified mesothelium cells, and they are epithelium. In your esophagus, this serosa is actually replaced by very thick fibrous tissue, connective tissue, and we call that as an adventitia. Okay, so only in the esophagus. Okay, so another place we see esophagus as well as other is retroperitoneal organ parts, just to reinforce that and pro to pro protect that part of the digestive tract. Remember, the retroperitoneal part was part of the duodenum was there. Part of the sigmoid colon was there too. Okay, so those were retroperitoneal regions present. So those regions will contain both adventitia as well as serosa. All right, now let's talk about what is known as the enteric nervous system, or ACA, gut brain. Okay, so technically speaking, the whole GI tract, the lumen of the tube, it can be considered as an external to the body because it is not part of the body. It is exposed at both ends. It's a tube exposed to the external environment at the both ends. And so in order for it to maintain its homeostasis, which homeostasis in its functions means it needs to absorb the food, absorb the nutrients. Okay, the gut has its own nervous system. Recall, so far we have learned that the nervous system is central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system, but there is this partial third nervous system present in our body, what is known as the gut brain. Okay, this is also known as the enteric nervous system, just because the name enteric means it is something to do with our intestines. Okay, so it is made up of almost billions of neurons, almost more than the neurons which make our spinal cord. Okay, these are enteric neurons, and there are some pacemaker cells, neurons in them which will control the local environment or motility of the intestine. Okay, so there are two plexes we already talked about in previous slides which are present. One is the submucosal nerve plex. So the submucosal nerve plex was at the submucosa. And what does it control? It controls the glands and the smooth muscle cells of the mucosal membrane. Okay, the glands are going to be your mucus glands, are also the glands which secrete hormones or acids in the stomachs particularly. For small intestine and stomach, there are neuroendocrine glands, which I have mentioned in earlier slides too. The second plex which we had seen is the myenteric nerve plex, which was present uh, between the two layers of the muscles in the muscularis externa. Okay, so these neurons, the enteric neurons, they form plexes. So there will be some ganglia. These are typically unmyelinated neurons, and they are actually connected to the central nervous system through afferent visceral fibers. Okay, we also have autonomous nervous fibers, which will also come and form a synapse with the enteric plexus. Okay, so the gut does have sympathetic as well as parasympathetic nerves connecting to it. This is can be felt for certain people. When you are too stressed out, you may have too much gastrointestinal movement. For some people, all of a sudden stress uh, can have them have diarrhea, etc. And parasympathetic impulses is especially when you are actually relaxed. There, the GI motility is actually higher and more involved in the digestion of the neurons. Oh, sorry, nutrients. Here is a picture just showing you all the nerve system. So you can see that it's a kind of a network which is very closely related to one another. So all the nerves present in the enteric nervous system. So this is the picture which was just showing you the intrinsic nerve plexus, which is the meandric, which is present between the longitudinal as well as the circular layer of the muscularis externa. And then we have some nerves, these nerves, and I don't think so they are actually connected to any autonomous nervous system being shown in this picture here. Yeah. Okay, so let's look at how does the neural reflex pathways are initiated, and how does the GI control its motility with the help of these neurons or enteric nervous system. Okay, so since the lumen of the GI tract, or the alimentary canal, what we call, is exposed to different environment, there can be changes in the stretch receptors because you have just eaten and your stomach is full, or the food is moving through the intestine. There can be change in the pH because you might be taking in some more acidic food, etc. And also the stomach pH is different than the intestinal pH. Okay, so the nutrients concentration varies, the solute concentrations varies. So those changes are actually detected by chemoreceptors. So chemoreceptors will detect the chemical changes. The osmoreceptors will check or respond to change in electrolyte or salt concentrations, and mechanoreceptors will check the stretching of the stretching present. Okay, and then they can actually communicate with the central nervous system, etc. too. Uh, and they can also, the central nervous system can control, can exert its pressure too through the smooth muscles, or so if the central nervous system is involved, then we call it as the long reflexes are coming. And if it is local, intrinsic nerve plaques, or what we call as the gut brain, is present, then they will also act through the smooth muscle cells or glands, and then you'll have the response in changing in the contractility. That time we call it that the control is through short reflexes. Okay. So what are the regulatory mechanisms involved in GI tract motility? And so again, as I mentioned earlier, is either the mechanoreceptors or is the chemoreceptors. Okay. The second thing which can affect is your intrinsic as well as the extrinsic controls. So the mechanoreceptors and chemoreceptors, as I mentioned in the previous slide, is going to respond to stretch, change in osmolality, pH, etc., or any presence of any substrate or anything or end product, what are the chemicals present. They can either initiate a reflex which could either activate or inhibit the digestive glands so that you do not produce digestive secretions, etc., or they can actually stimulate the smooth muscle cells to mix or move the contents, whatever is required. In the intrinsic and the extrinsic controls, we discussed has two: short reflexes as well as long reflexes. So in the short reflexes, as I explained in the other slide, the enteric nerve plexus will respond to the GI tract. In the long reflexes, your central nervous system control centers will actually regulate the GI tract involvement. Okay, and they can also help exert their actions through hormones which will be released from the cells present in the stomach or the small intestine, and that can actually affect the GI motion. Okay, let's talk about now the anatomical structures which are involved in the GI tract or is involved in the digestive system. So the first one is your mouth, and the cavity which is enclosed by the mouth, like this big when you open up, is known as the buccal cavity. Okay, so the mouth opens up at what we call as the oral orifice, which is the opening of your mouth. What is the function of this mouth is sensation. The sensation of the food means the touch of the food too, including and also taste. We also know that the taste buds are present in the mouth. Uh, it also does mechanical processing. It also lubricates the food and this everything here, and then also digest some carbohydrates and some lipids, because we do have amylases and lipases which are secreted by the salivary glands as well as in the mouth, which is the lipase. Okay, so the tissue which is lining the mouth is actually stratified squamous epithelium, which is multi-layers of squamous flattened cells. Now you can think about why is it multi-layer. Again, remember, multi-layer simple squamous cells or multi-layer epithelium cells are present wherever there is more friction. So when you put something in your mouth and you're chewing, that definitely is going to create friction. Okay, so these are stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium cells in your cheeks, gums. Okay, now your tongue has keratinized cells. Okay, so although we keep our tongue wet by secretion of saliva in the mouth, but again, think about and connect the dots that typically the keratinized squamous stratified squamous epithelium tend to be dry areas, which is your skin. Okay, let's look into this picture and look at couple of the anatomical landmarks. So first is your upper lip. Everybody knows about it. So okay, and then teeth is the alveolar process, and everybody knows about the gums, what we call as gingivae here. Now the upper lip is connected to the gum through this connective tissue link, what we call as superior labial frenulum. Now labial means lips. Anything with lips will be that. So superior labial frenulum, and so will we have at the bottom lip too, we will have an inferior labial frenulum. Okay, inside here, this is the large muscular structure, tongue. Okay, the tongue is also connected to its base, and that's called the lingual frenulum. Okay, and you can also see these arch present in the tongue here, right here, with couple of the openings. These openings are actually these are the sublingual folds with the openings of the sublingual glands present in there. Okay, looking at the roof in the interior part of the mouth cavity or buccal cavity, the roof is made by is palatine bone, and it's a hard palate. So the initial portion up to here is hard part, and then behind it is the soft palate. In the buccal cavity, we see couple ridges present too. The first one is this ridge present is known as palatoglossal arch. Okay, so you can remember it by the palate is there, and then glossal is your tongue. So it's the first arch, palatoglossal arch. The behind it, the posterior one is known as the palatopharyngeal arch, because the opening here is going to be near pharynx, is the pharynx, or also we call it oropharynx or nasopharynx areas are there. So hence we can call it as palatopharyngeal arch. Hanging in the roof from the roof is what we call as uvula. Okay, is the soft structure which is known as the uvula. Okay, you also see these two things at the back in between the palatoglossal arch and the palatopharyngeal arch, which is known as the tonsils, and these are called the palatine tonsils. Okay, So these are the palatine tonsils, which is part of the your lymphatic system. Okay. Another thing is the space which is between your lips and your gums is known as the oral vestibule. Okay, I forgot to talk about the oral vestibule. Hopefully, I have covered everything in this picture. Okay, so let's look at this picture. This gives you a side view because it gives you a little bit better view of the tongue and where it is attached. Okay, this was the hyoid bone which has been cut. So the tongue is a muscular structure which actually is connected to the hyoid bone through the muscles. Okay, so that's one thing I want to show in this picture. And why do we call hard palate as hard palate is because of this portion of the bone is there. The back side is the uvula, which is the soft palate. In here, we also see a couple more tonsils in this picture. One is the palatine tonsils, which is present at the back. And the second is we find here is the lingual muscle. Oh, sorry, lingual tonsils, not the muscle. Okay, so that's there. Another area what I want to mention about is called the oropharynx. So the oropharynx is this portion which is the back of the mouth, and then as it goes down through the larynx region, we call this as laryngopharynx region. So this portion is the laryngopharynx, just superior to the esophagus. Okay, so these are the things which were not very easily visible in the other picture we discussed, which was this one. Okay. All right, so the lips and the cheeks, let's talk a little bit about this. So they are made up of the skeletal muscles. The lips have a muscle which is the orbicularis oris. We will talk about, or you have learned about this actually in your anatomy physiology part 1, and orbicularis oris. The fascicles run in circular, so it can help to close your mouth. We also have buccinators, which are present on the lateral sides of your of your mouth cavity or buccal cavity. So those are the two major muscles. We do have other muscles present too in the cheeks, in your face, but they are not involved in your chewing, okay, or in associated with your buccal cavity. The vestibule we already talked about, and we also talked about the oral cavity and the labial frenulums. Now, what's the major function of the cheeks and the lips is to keep the food inside the mouth when we are chewing, and they also play a role in speech. For example, the lips, etc., and the cheeks helps you to whistle, also to speak too. The palate we already talked about is a hard palate, which is the palatine process of your maxilla, and also it's the horizontal process of the palatine bone. So palatine bones are L-shaped bones. So the roof is made of the hard palate. The soft palate actually is just the skeletal muscle, and the uvula is the hanging portion from it. So this uvula closes your nasopharynx when we are swallowing something. The tongue is the muscular structure. Okay, so this mixes the food with the saliva and to form the bolus. And tongue also have a lot of special senses on it, which is the taste buds, and it also initiates the swallowing and also helps to make the consonants, which is the sound we make. Okay. Now, the skeletal muscles present in the tongue, there are actually intrinsic muscles present, which can help to change the shape of the muscle, shape of the tongue. Some people can actually curl their tongue like that, and some people cannot do it. Okay, these intrinsic muscles are not attached to any bone, but then we have the extrinsic muscles which are associated with the tongue, which can help to change the position of the tongue, and they are attached to the bone. Okay, so typically the base is attached to the hyoid bone. Okay, now tongue also produces what is known as the lingual lipase. So the lingual lipase is secreted by serous cells, which are present in the foliate as well as the valate papillae. We will talk about these. These are taste buds which are present on the tongue. Okay, so the lipase, although it has a very little role in overall lipid fat digestion, but it is crucial, and it is produced by those taste buds present. Okay, so let's now talk about the tongue uh, taste buds, or what we call as the papillae too. Okay, so the tongue surface is rough. Okay, it's a little bit rough. Not as rough as in many animals like cats or dogs. Their tongues tends to be more rough, and this is because they bear on the surface, they bear these small papillae present on there. So this is the dorsal side of the tongue, the top one over there, and the under will be the ventral side. Okay, so the surface of the tongue is a little bit rough because of the formation of these what we call as filiform papillae. So filiform papillae does not contain any taste buds. Okay, but then scattered around you see these tiny little mushroom like little raised areas. These are called fungiform papillae. So the fungiform papillae tend to be more reddish, and they're scattered all over around on your tongue as well as your buccal cavity, and they do contain taste buds. We also have what we call as circumvallate or just simple valate papillae. These are kind of an inverted V shape uh, taste buds present towards the posterior end of the tongue. Okay, so they also contain the taste buds, and then also we have on the side of the tongues we have these cuts. These are called the foliate papillae. Okay, so the foliate papillae contains the taste buds too, and primarily their function is in the young children, okay, infants as well as the children. Okay, so there is a little sulcus on the tongue present here in the middle of the tongue, what is known as the medial sulcus of the tongue, and the back portion, the posterior portion of the tongue contains lots and lots of lingual tonsils. Two paired palatine tonsils are present. We had seen that earlier between the platopharyngeal and platoglossal arch. So one of them is here, the other one is right here. Okay, so those are the tongue papillae. So let's look at the salivary glands. Okay, so the salivary glands produce what we is saliva. Okay, so they secrete saliva. What's the function of the saliva is to keep the mouth moist and also keep it clean, and it also moisten the food, so decreases the friction, so when we swallow that it doesn't cut us. Okay, it does have enzymes in it, which can help to dissolve or start breaking down the food inside our mouth. And they also have since it's water, so the water actually can dissolve all the odorants or the taste molecules, which helps us to taste the food. Okay, so there are two types of salivary glands. So we have the extrinsic salivary glands present, and then we have the intrinsic salivary glands present. The extrinsic are themselves, they're outside the oral cavity. Okay, so the one is the largest one is the parotid glands right here. Okay, so this is the parotid glands, and they are connected to the mouth cavity through the parotid duct, which actually passes through your muscle, which is this is the masseter muscle, and then buccinator is the most inner muscle, which helps you to pull your cheeks inside. Okay, and they open up into your superior jaw or the gum place here. Okay, and the other one, extrinsic muscle, is submandibular muscle, submandibular glands. Sorry, submandibular is underneath the mandible, so this is the submandibular glands. Gland is there, and then we have sublingual gland right here. So this one is the sublingual. So sublingual, submandibular opens up into the frenulum underneath the tongue right here, and the sublinguals actually open through number of different openings. Okay. Now the facial nerve actually runs through the parotid gland, and sometimes if you need any surgery, then can actually result in the paralysis of the facial paralysis. So looking at the histology of the salivary glands, there are two types of cells which are produced. In this picture, you can see them. One of them is actually with the dark nuclei present, and the other are less lightly in. So we have a mucus cells which produce mucin, which dissolves um, into the water and produces this sliminess into the saliva. The second cells are known as the serous cells. So the serous cells tend to produce the saliva, which is watery, um, enzymes, ions, and a little bit of the mucin. Okay. The parotid and the submandibular glands are mostly serous cells, and the sublingual is typically your mucus cells. Now, what is the saliva? The saliva is 97 to 99% is water, and it is slightly acidic in nature. And it does contain electrolytes like sodium, potassium, chloride, phosphate, and bicarbonate, etc. And it does have contain enzymes like salivary amylases and lingual lipases. As I mentioned earlier, it also have mucin, which dissolves and gives you mucus. It can have some kind of metabolic waste like uric acid and urea, etc. Saliva also have lysozyme, which is extremely potent against gram-positive bacteria. They also have IgA. IgA actually binds to any bacteria and try to actually clump them or agglutinate them. Some defensins, other proteins, antimicrobial proteins are present. Again, they will be all produced by the serous cells of the glands. And a very dilute amount of cyanide compounds are present in our mouth cavity, and that's very potent against the microorganisms. All right, so let's discuss the control of salivation, how our body produces this saliva. So typically on one day, your body does produce anywhere between 1 to 1.5 liters of saliva, and this is produced by the intrinsic glands, which will keep the mouth moist. The extrinsic salivary glands, which are paired salivary glands like parotid, sublingual, as well as the submandibular, they are activated by the parasympathetic nervous system. So whenever you smell food, or the food is inside your mouth, or you even think about the food, that stimulates your chemoreceptors or mechanoreceptors present inside your mouth cavity, and that will actually trigger the salivatory nuclei in your brain stem, and then the impulses will come through the parasympathetic fibers of your cranial nerve 7 as well as number 9. Okay. The extrinsic salivary glands, these are serous glands. That means they are going to produce an enzyme-rich saliva. And as I mentioned earlier, that can be because of the sight, smell, or even thought. Okay. When we have sympathetic nervous system triggered, if you are under stress, or you feel like you are under danger, this is going to inhibit the salivation process and will result in your mouth which is dry. Okay. Sometimes dehydration, when you do not drink enough water, that can actually leads to the glands to reserve the fluids, which can result into your dry mouth. This can actually help to grow the bacteria in your mouth and can actually give bad breath, what is known as halitosis. Okay. All right, so now let's talk about teeth which are present in your buccal cavity. So the function of the teeth in our mouth is to tear as well as to grind the food for digestion. Okay. Teeth are also known as alveolar processes. There are two types of teeth. One is the primary teeth, or we also call them milk teeth or deciduous teeth, which are present in our early childhood. And the second are the permanent teeth, which we get around somewhere after the age of 10 to 12. Okay. So the deciduous teeth or milk teeth are 20 of them, and they start coming, or the infants will have it around the age of 6. Okay, and then after this age of 6 to 12 years, your permanent teeth are there. Okay, each type of teeth, so 20 deciduous teeth, they all are divided into different groups. So you have incisors, you have canine, and then you have molars, and then premolars, etc. Okay. In the younger children, we only have incisors, canines, and molars. Okay, and there are two incisors, central and lateral. There will be one canine, and then you have the two molars, which is the first molar and the second molar. In permanent teeth, or in adults, we can say we have incisors. Okay, central typically will lose or will be coming around the 7-year, and lateral, and then we have canine, which is right here, and then we have two premolars, and then we have the molars. If you look into the pictures here, so please remember how to recognize them. The molars have two roots rather than one root, so that's another important thing to remember about their structures. And we'll look at their teeth structure in detail in next slide. So as I mentioned in the earlier slide, the classes of the teeth is the incisors, and then canines, premolars, and the molars. Okay, so the shape can be described as the incisors are kind of chisel shape. Okay, and then your canine are kind of a fang-like teeth, which are more used for tearing things. And then you have the premolars, which have the broader crown. The crown is the top area, and then the molars even have more broader crowns, and they have the round cuspids, and they have two roots. Now the molars are the best grinders. Okay, so the canines are actually to cut through things. So we have in the younger children, you have two incisors, one canine again, and two molars per quadrant. And in the adults, permanent teeth, you have two incisors, one canine, two premolars, and three molars per quadrant. Okay, let's look at the tooth structure. So the tooth structure, what comes out of the gum area is the crown region. Okay, so the crown region has white portion on it, what is known as the enamel. Underneath is what is we call as dentin. So dentin is more kind of a softer area, softer part. Okay, enamel is the hard part. Okay, then they from here they're stuck inside your gum and then are in the embedded in the bone. Okay, the space or the line between the tooth and the gum is known as the gingival sulcus. This is the place where typically you are flossing. to remove any food particles so that you do not have any plaque built up. Okay. Underneath the gingiva or the gum is the bone. Okay, so this is your jaw bones. Okay, and the part of the bone, part of the tooth which is present in the gum is known as the neck of the tooth. And beneath the neck, which is somewhere in the middle of the gum and all the way down into the bone, is known as the root of the tooth. The central to the tooth underneath the dentin is a soft area. So this is known as the pulp cavity. The pulp cavity contains the blood vessels, both the arteries and the veins, plus they have the nerves. Okay. The tooth is cemented to the ligament. This ligament is known as periodontal ligament, and then that ligament connects the tooth to the bone. Okay, so this is the pulp region, and then it tapers down into what we call as the root. So sometimes you have heard about the root canal surgeries. Okay, and this portion is known as the apex. I think I covered everything for the tooth structure. Okay, so now let's discuss some of the common homeostatic imbalances of the tooth. Okay, so and the gums. So one of the most common one is the dental caries, which is the cavities. The dental caries are just the demineralization. That means the hard portion is gone of the enamel, as well as the dentin is also gone. Okay, so this is kind of holes there, and this is typically because of the bacteria, because the bacteria produces acid, and then acid just simply dissolves the tooth. Okay, you may also see a lot of dental plaque, which is hard part, and it is formed from carbohydrates, sugars, and bacteria and debris which can adhere to your teeth. The more bacteria you have, the more acid they will produce, and that will dissolve the calcium salts. And the bacteria also produces many proteolytic enzymes which will then digest the organic matter. So what's the major way we can prevent it is by brushing your teeth and also flossing them. Okay, so at least brushing twice a day before you go to bed, because then your 7 to 8 hours the food will be stuck otherwise in your teeth. The second type of normal or very common disease is gingivitis. So gingivitis is when you have these plaques formed and they have calcified and they are a little harder, and these are called the tartar now. Okay, then this calculus can disrupt, because it is hard, it can disrupt the seal which is present between your gum as well as the teeth, and then you will have bacteria growing there, and you'll have more bleeding teeth whenever you brush, etc. The third, if you don't take care of your teeth, is going to be periodontitis. This is when you have neglected the gingivitis. Okay, in here the immune cells will attack the intruders, that means anything which is entering your gums, and you'll have swollen gums present. Okay, and eventually your periodontal ligament is broken down, and then the osteoclasts come there, which are the bone cells, and they will start chewing up the bone and they dissolve that. So the end result of periodontitis is that you may lose your tooth. Okay, and it may also actually can initiate an clot formation in your coronary arteries and also in your cerebral arteries. So the tooth health is actually going to affect your overall health also. Okay, one of the risk factors which is very important for any tooth and gum disease is smoking, diabetes mellitus, and also if you do oral piercing. Okay, so that can enhance the chance of more bacteria going into your mouth cavity. Diabetes mellitus is because you have a lot of sugar already in your blood, that enhances the infections or bacteria. Here are a few questions. You can check them for your understanding. And again, I will say that you review the material only, then answer them from your memory. Next region in the digestive tract is what we call as pharynx region. So it has two parts to it. One is the uh, oropharynx region, which is part of the oral and connecting the pharynx region. And the second one is the laryngopharynx, and these are shown by these circles. Okay, so what is the role of the pharynx region in here is, so you can actually, it's just a passageway, it's just passing the food from there. Okay, so food and fluids go into the esophagus. Remember, esophagus is here at the back. And then also is that it can actually control to not allow the food to go inside the trachea. Okay, this region also is made up of stratified squamous epithelium lining and does have a lot of goblet cells which will produce the mucin or mucus. Okay, the pharynx also contains certain skeletal muscles in there which actually helps it to constrict. Okay, so we call those as pharyngeal constrictors. Okay, so they are present inside the inner lung, inner as well as the outer layers of the muscles. Okay, so now let's move on to the esophagus. What is the esophagus? So the esophagus actually is a tube which is muscular in nature, and it runs from your laryngopharynx region to the stomach. So if we look into this picture from here to here, can be anywhere between 6 to 8 inches present in the body. So it, and remember there's a diaphragm right here. So it actually goes through the diaphragm through an opening, what is known as esophageal hiatus. Okay, and as we move downwards through the esophagus, our lumen, the epithelium tissue changes. Okay, remember we started with its stratified squamous epithelium in the mouth, and then as we go downwards, and as we reach the stomach, it's going to turn into a simple columnar epithelium cells. Okay, it joins the stomach at what we call as the cardial orifice. Okay, so if you can remember, it is by connecting it to the heart, which is pericardium, etc. So that means they are meeting there towards that area, so hence we can call it as cardial orifice, and also has a sphincter present at that point, and that sphincter is known as the cardiac sphincter again, or it is also known as gastroesophageal sphincter. Okay, so this typically is kept closed as because the stomach has acid in it, so we don't want that acid to come up. But as we age, this sphincter can become a little bit loose, and we will have more and more acid coming up, what we normally known as acid reflux. Okay, so let's look at the histology and the anatomy of it. So esophagus does contain all 4 alimentary canal layers. It has the esophageal mucosa, and which is actually a stratified squamous epithelium, as I mentioned, and then will change to simple columnar in the stomach. Then we have esophageal glands present, which are present in the submucosa, which secrete mucus to help form the bolus and move it around and slip it around. Then we also have muscularis externa, which is your skeletal muscle superiorly on the top, because we have the constrictors here nearby, and then somewhere in the middle we have the skeletal as well as the smooth, and as we go down towards your stomach, it is going to be all smooth muscles. And the outermost layer is more thickened, and we talked about that earlier, that it is the adventitia, it is the connective tissue membrane rather than your serosa membranes present outside. Okay. Some of the homeostatic imbalances of the esophagus can be heartburn when the stomach acids are regurgitated into the esophagus. That, as I mentioned, as we age, the sphincter may become not extremely tight, and then it is loose, so it can actually allow the acid to come inside. Okay, and that can happen also if you eat too much, so it's your eating habits too. So remember, normally people say is that you should only eat approximately around 75% of your hunger stomach full. That gives some room, the acid will stay down. If you fill it too much up till up, then everything is gonna be coming outwards too. Okay, so excess food, drink, extreme obesity when you have too much fat, or pregnancy because the baby, the embryo or the baby is growing in the stomach. There's very little space left there. Sometimes part of the stomach comes out of through the opening, which is the hiatus present opening. Okay, and it can come out into the chest cavity, what we also known as hiatal hernias. Okay, so this is a structural abnormality. So this is a normal picture of a normal stomach in which the esophagus ends here, and that's the diaphragm. But here you can see the opening has become larger, and the stomach, part of the stomach has actually protruded out into the chest cavity. Okay, so this can result in what we call as esophagitis, means inflammation of the esophagus. You may also end up having esophageal ulcers and eventually esophageal cancers too. Okay, so let's now look at what are the digestive processes which occur in the mouth. So ingestion is one of them. Second is mechanical digestion. We chew the food. Then we have propulsion, which is swallowing. We call it a deglutition. And then we also have some chemical digestion. So salivary amylases and lingual lipase helps to dissolve little bit of carbohydrates and lipids. In the mouth, we have no absorption except for few drugs. They can be absorbed inside the mouth. Okay, so let's look at the first one, the mastication or chewing. Okay, so typically once you bite into any food and that's taken inside your mouth, and then your cheeks and lips try to keep the food in between your teeth. Okay, and your tongue moves it around. So in this GIF you can see the tongue is here, and it moves it around and keep it together as one round structure, which is known as the bolus. Okay, and your teeth will keep cutting it and grinding it. Mastication is partially under your control, so we can say that it is voluntary, and partially it is reflective. Okay, so anything which goes into your mouth, sometimes you may know that then you will start chewing it. So it stretches the reflexes and the pressure receptors in the cheek, as well as the gum and the tongue is there. The second is what we call as deglutition. So in the deglutition is actually done, which is swallowing, is done by the coordinative action of couple of the things. So it does involve your tongue, it does involve your soft palate, it does involve your pharynx region as well as esophagus. Actually requires 22 muscle groups. Okay, so it has two phases. One is inside the mouth cavity, what we call as the buccal phase. This is your voluntary contraction of the tongue. I want you to pay attention to this video playing here. You can see that how the tongue moves. Look at how it keeps changing its shape. It's lifted upwards. Okay, so touches the roof. And then constrictors, pharyngeal constrictors are involved. Uvula is involved too because epiglottis is involved too because it has to close the close your trachea. The uvula has to close your nasal openings. So the second phase is the pharyngeal esophageal phase. This is involuntary. Okay, so you do not control it. Okay, and this is typically controlled by the vagus nerve. And the control center of the vagus nerve is in your medulla as well as in your lower pons. All right, so let's look at the steps in detail. Okay, so in the buccal phase, which is number one phase of in the glutination, is your upper esophageal sphincter is closed. Okay, so that means the cardiac sphincter is closed here, and your tongue presses hard against hard palate, the roof of your mouth, and then forcing the food bolus to go back downwards. Okay, so into the oropharynx. Okay, in here, second phase is your pharyngeal esophagus phase begins. So now the tongue is touching the roof of your mouth and it's just blocking the whole mouth cavity so that the bolus cannot come back. Okay, try doing a swallow and pay attention to what's your tongue doing. Okay, now the soft palate and the uvula rises and it's going to close your nasopharynx, which is the nasal openings in the pharynx region here. And then the larynx also rises so that your epiglottis comes and closes your trachea. Okay, and then your upper esophageal sphincters, they relax and the food enters into the esophagus. So this portion where it meets is the upper esophageal sphincter, and it enters uh, into the esophagus. In the third is it's the pharyngeal esophageal phase. Here the constrictor muscles present, uh, which are present in the pharynx region, they will contract and they will force the food into the esophagus and inferiorly. Now once it's there, the upper esophageal sphincter again contracts, and then the circular muscles in the esophageal will start contracting and pushing this bolus downwards. And then eventually your gastroesophageal sphincter will open up and the bolus will enter inside your stomach. All right, so now let's talk about the stomach. So the stomach is uh, a bag-like structure and it is present in your upper left quadrant, and it's just a sack to store the food for some time. Okay, so uh, it is empty stomach is pretty small and has the volume of approximately only 50 ml, but it can expand. It can expand a lot and can hold up to 4 liters of the volume. So that's a lot of change, 50 ml to 4000 ml. Okay, and again, empty stomach is anywhere small size, 6 to 8 inches. Okay, so let's look at this picture to see it's a structure. So this is the esophagus, which was coming from here, and then the esophageal the sphincter here, the cardial sphincter, or the esophageal stomach gastric sphincter is present here. This region, which is first region, is known as the cardia. Okay, and then the stomach's shape is that it rises towards the little bit towards the diaphragm. That region, which is the highest point is known as the fundus. And then it curves around. So this larger outer curve is known as the greater curvature. Okay, and this smaller curvature is here. This is known as the lesser curvature. Okay, the stomach then tapers downwards into this tube-like structure, which is the lumen, and the tube-like structure is known as the pyloric canal. So where it is smaller, it kind of funnel shape at that point. So that funnel, which is from the largest point to smaller, is known as the pyloric antrum. Between the duodenum and the stomach, you have the pyloric sphincter, which is another wall. When you look inside, the stomach has these folds in it, what are known as the rugae of the mucosal folds. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. What's the major function of the stomach? The stomach's function is to mix and store the food products, and also change the bolus, which is one solid, into semi-solid liquid, what is known as chyme or chyme. Okay, so here is a picture of just the cadaver stomach, and very similar to that which is drawn in here. You do see the lesser curvature here, and then the larger curvature, greater curvature here. So we did talk about the gross anatomy already. So we talked about the cardial part, which is surrounding the cardial orifice. And then we talked about the fundus too, which is dome-shaped structure, and the body, the rest of the body, and then pyloric part, which has an antrum, pyloric antrum, which is kind of a superior most portion, and then pyloric canal, as well as the pyloric valve. So the greater curvature is convex shape, and then lesser curvature is more concave, and then certain mesenteries are present, okay, which actually tether or keep the stomach in its place. So we have the lesser omentum, which is going to start from the lesser curvature of the stomach and connect it to the liver. On the greater curvature side is we have the greater omentum, which actually is kind of a apron shaped structure which goes downwards, and that contains the fat deposits as well as the lymph nodes present in them. Okay, and this greater curvature also is connected to your small intestine, and then this greater omentum covers your spleen, transverse colon, etc., and also mesocolon part of it is hidden underneath the greater omentum. We have looked at this picture earlier. So this yellow color sheet which is present here is the greater omentum. So it covers everything. It's like an apron. So you have to pull it backwards to look at things. When you pull it backwards, and then you also, so here is the greater omentum here. You cut it off, and then you can see, pull the liver upwards, and then you can see this is the lesser omentum region here present. Okay, and then when you remove the digestive organs like stomach, liver, etc., and small intestine too, then you can see the transverse mesocolon. Also you see the mesenteries and the sigmoidal mesocolon, etc. Now let's look at the microanatomy of the stomach inside. So stomach has the harshest environment present in our body. Okay, it has an acid which is almost, the pH is 1 to 2, which is very, very strong, and I think all of us have experienced it whenever you have thrown up, and it's extremely acidic in nature. So the stomach is made up of 4 tunics as such, but the muscularis and the mucosa is modified to deal with the acid it produces. Okay, the mucosa is modified in a way so that it doesn't get digested, because remember, it's one single layer cells of epithelium tissue. Okay, so the mucosal barrier, how to protect it, is because it has so much acid that it has a thick mucus of bicarbonate with it. Okay, so this is a bicarbonate rich mucus being produced so that it stays on the surface of the mucosa. Okay, and then the epithelium tissue, the epithelial cells, we know that they're always joined by tight junctions right underneath their apical side or brush border side. Then the outer layer, because the food has to be churned into a chyme or semi-liquid, it's a liquid, almost liquefied. So rather than having 2 layers of muscles, there are 3 layers of muscles. So the muscularis externa is modified. So you have the external layer is the longitudinal layer, second is the circular layer, and the last one is the oblique layer present. Okay, so the inner one is the oblique layer, which physically breaks down the food. Okay, now let's look at the microanatomy of the stomach layers. So the mucosal layer is a simple columnar epithelium cells. So you can look at these cells. These look like columns. The nucleus is sitting at the bottom portions. It's more kind of oblong cells. Okay, so they secrete 2 layers of alkaline mucus. Okay, so the top layer, the surface layer, is will then trap the bicarbonates there. The stomach is also have lots of these openings, what we call as gastric pits. So you can see these gastric pits present here. So these gastric pits open up into these lumen structures, and then the epithelium continues there. Okay, and these gastric pits contain what we call as gastric glands. Okay, so we're going to look at different types of cells present in them. Okay, so this is the mucosal layer. Underneath the mucosal layer, you have this connective tissue membrane, which is the areolar connective tissue present. That's lamina propria. And then you have the muscularis mucosal layer. Then you have a thick submucosa present. And underneath the submucosa layer is your muscularis externa with 3 layers. And then between the external longitudinal layer and the circular layer is your myenteric plexus present. And then we have the serous membrane, which is going to be what? Visceral or parietal. So that's going to be the visceral one. Okay. So I want you to pay attention in these gastric pits. So you can see that the cells lining this gastric pits, they have different colors. So this is your surface epithelium, which is light pink. And then you see in the around the neck of these gastric pits, you do have darker cells, which are typically just the mucosal cells. They're going to produce mucus. Then in between these blue color cells are scattered. These scattered are called parietal cells. And then you see green color cells right here. These are called enteroendocrine cells. Okay, so just right now I want you to remember them. Parietal cells, endocrine cells, pink color, darker pink is mucosal cells, and then we have purple color cells called chief cells. Okay, so we're gonna mention what do they produce in next slides. Okay, so now let's go to the gastric glands. Okay, so the surface epithelium mucosal cells are different. Okay, so this is this simple columnar epithelium, then cells with lots and lots of mucus secretory vesicles. These are mucous neck cells. These blue color cells are the parietal cells. The parietal cells actually produce what? They are going to produce HCl or acid. Okay. Then you have the purple color cells, which are called the chief cells. So the chief cells produce pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is an inactive enzyme which starts degrading proteins. So the parietal cells produce HCl. A small amount of HCl changes pepsinogen into pepsin, and then pepsin itself can change more and more pepsinogen into pepsin, which will then start digesting the proteins as they enter into the stomach. Okay. The enteroendocrine cells, which are these green cells, are these guys. They actually produce hormones. Okay. And they can produce some neurotransmitters too, which can act as paracrines, means they act at the neighboring cells. Those paracrine chemical messengers are serotonin and histamine. They may also produce hormones. So they may produce gastrin in the stomach. They may produce secretin in the small intestine. We will talk about that. And they can also produce what we call as somatostatins. Okay. So enteroendocrine cells can produce neurotransmitters, serotonin, they can produce histamine, which is a cytokine, chemical messengers, or they can produce hormones, and we'll come back to them. So from this slide, you need to remember it's the parietal cells are producing HCl, and your chief cells are producing pepsinogen. Some of the homeostatic imbalances of the stomach is one is gastritis. So gastritis is when you have the inflammation of the epithelium tissue inside your stomach. Okay, and that can happen if something else breaches the stomach's mucosal barriers. Okay, so you may have peptic or gastric ulcers formed. So here is the ulcers formation. Okay. One of the bacteria which scientists have found is known as H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. So they can cause that. Okay. Other things which can cause ulcers, peptic ulcer, is overuse of NSAIDs, which is your anti-inflammatory drugs like aspirin or ibuprofen, which is Advil. If you take too much of it, then that can cause the peptic ulcers, etc. Okay, so let's now discuss about what is the digestive process going on in the stomach. Okay, so looking at the overall picture, the things which the stomach does is, one thing it does is breakdown of the food physically. We ingest a bolus, which is more kind of a solid, soft, solid thing, and then the stomach churns it around and then mixes it with the gastric juices, making it into chyme. Okay, stomach keeps the food for some time too, so it is a holding bag. Okay, and also then passes this chyme into the small intestine. Okay, the only thing which starts digesting in the stomach is the proteins, and proteins are broken down by HCl, which is the hydrochloric acid being produced inside the stomach. Okay, their HCl turns on pepsin from pepsinogen, and we have looked at that. So pepsin is a protease. What it does is it breaks down the milk protein, the caseins, and also then turns it into curdy substance. In the infants, this casein is changed by renin. Okay, so I want you to remember that the only thing which starts being digested is in the stomach is the proteins. Okay, so that's an important thing to remember. Nothing else gets digested in the stomach. Okay, some of the things can be absorbed inside the stomach, and those are your lipid soluble, such as alcohol things, or aspirin can be absorbed. Okay, Another function which the stomach does is extremely important, is that it secretes what we call as intrinsic factor. And this intrinsic factor is extremely important to absorb vitamin B12, which is the folic acid. So folic acid is extremely important. It's a coenzyme for a number of enzymes which are required for synthesis of nucleic acids. Remember, DNA and RNA are important to keep the function of the cells very well, because we need for the cell repair, everything, etc. Okay, it's also required for red blood cell formation. Okay, so if there is no intrinsic factor, then people can have what we call as pernicious anemia. Okay, and that can be treated by giving injections of B12 to the patients. Okay, now let's look at what are the gastric secretions stomach produces, and also how do we regulate it. So the gastric secretion is a mixture of many things, and we call it as a gastric juice. Okay, so the gastric juice contains acid, mucus, and it also contains enzyme pepsinogen. Okay, so typically in a daily basis, our gastric juices is around 3 liters, which is a little bit less than a gallon. Okay, so the gastric secretion is regulated by vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve, remember, the cranial nerve 10 stimulates it, it increases its secretion, and the sympathetic nervous system, when it is turned on, the gastric secretion is turned down. Okay, the gastric secretion is also regulated by a hormone called gastrin. Okay, so gastrin, along with neurotransmitter acetylcholine and histamine, they actually can stimulate the enzymes production pepsin, the pepsinogen, or eventually to pepsin, as well as HCl. So the hormone which regulates the gastric secretion is gastrin. So the names are very similar, so you can remember it easier. Okay, there are antagonists to this hormone, and those are actually produced by small intestine, and we will talk about them when we talk about in the small intestine. All right, so there are 3 phases in which the gastric is actually secretion occurs. One is known as the cephalic or reflex phase, and the second is known as the gastric phase, and the third is known as the intestinal phase. Okay, let's look at these one by one. So in the cephalic phase, which is the shortest phase, and this is typically before the food actually has physically entered. Okay, and it lasts for few minutes. Okay, so what triggers this phase is the sight, the smell, or the taste, or even the thought of the food can do that. And those are the receptors present in your mouth or in your nose, and they can change. They take these receptors to your brain, which is the centers are present in the medulla, and then in the vagus nerve, and then from there the action comes through the vagus nerve, and then the gastric secretion occurs. Okay, some of the inhibitory phases of the cephalic phase is the emotional state. Okay, so that is your sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so that can actually inhibit the secretion of the secretion, or having the cephalic phase trigger in which the stomach starts secreting the gastric juices. Then in the gastric phase is typically longest, and it is for 3 to 4 hours, and the food has already entered into the stomach. Okay, so now what's going to happen is, as the food enters, the stimulation is going to be by the mechanical stimuli, because now the stomach is expanding, it's distending. The second is the chemical stimulus. So as the proteins enter, inside the stomach, the pH increases because most of the proteins does affect, they have POH or pKa. So when the pH increases, because the food has entered, the acid has decreased, so that turns on the enteroendocrine G cells. So enteroendocrine G cells then start secreting the gastrins, and the gastrin then stimulates the production of the acid. So it's a paracrine effect. The inhibitory events which happens is digestion of the protein. Okay, so once the protein is digested, remember pepsinogen is converted into pepsin, and then pepsin starts chewing up the protein. This decreases the pH. That inhibits the release of the gastrin, and that's going to decrease the gastric activity. Okay, and then we have the intestinal phase, in which is actually the chyme's gonna enter into the duodenum. Okay, so now as the chyme enters into the intestine a little bit at a time, approximately 3 ml at a time, then that's gonna start increasing the secretion of intestinal gastrin, and also increases the gastric juices. That's the excitatory phase occurring. And then in the inhibitory phase happens is when the duodenum has more food, it's going to extend, that's going to activate the sympathetic system, and that tightens up your pyloric sphincter. And then the intestinal hormones which are secreted is secretin as well as cholecystokinin. Okay, so those are the two hormones which will be released. All right, so let's summarize again these regulation of the gastric secretions. So in this picture, so we have stimulatory events, and then we have the inhibitory events. This is just a repetition of what we just talked about. So we have three phases: cephalic phases, gastric phase, and the intestinal phase. In the cephalic phase, the food has not yet entered into the stomach, so that's important thing to remember. And it is just the sight or the thought is, or the smell is there, and that's going to go through your central nervous system, cerebral cortex, through the hypothalamus and medulla oblongata and vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve 10. Okay, so that's gonna stimulate the production of the gastric juices. In the gastric phase, this food has entered into the stomach, and then you have distension of the stomach has occurred. Okay, and now it is going to be in two ways. One is the long reflex, which is through the medulla and the vagus nerve. The shorter reflexes is going to be local change in the that environment. Okay, the food chemicals, pH change, etc. They will stimulate the enteroendocrine cells, which are G cells, and they will produce the gastrin. In the intestinal phase, so the food passes in little bit into the duodenum, and then the intestine, as the food is entering there, because they also have enteroendocrine cells, some of them will produce gastrin, and that gastrin is released into the blood, but this is a very, very short amount, a brief effect. Okay, and the stomach is starting to emptying. So these are the stimulatory events. So the gastrin will be little bit increased because the stomach is a little bit emptying right now. Okay, so in the inhibitory events is typically when you have depression or you're stressed out and there's a loss of appetite, and it works through the cerebral cortex, and then works through your decreased in parasympathetic nervous system. You're stressed out, that's going to decrease the gastrin production. Okay, when you're stressed out, your acidity in the stomach is also very high. So if we decrease the pH, means there's more excessive acid, that also inhibits the G cells and less production of the gastrin is there, and sympathetic nervous system also overrides all that inhibition sometimes. Okay, now if the third one, which is the in the intestinal phase, is as the duodenum is becoming more and more distended, and there is more presence of fatty chyme, and also more acidic is there, and also more salt is there, which is the hypertonic chyme has entered into there. So that's gonna actually trigger both the short and the long reflexes, and then that's gonna change the release of what we call as enterogastrons, which is your secretin and cholecystokinin. This is produced by the intestinal cells, and their effect is going to be inhibitory on the gastrin release from the stomach. All right, so let's discuss about how does the parietal cells make the HCl, which is secreted into the stomach lumen. Okay. So remember, the parietal cells are scattered around in the gastric pits in between the chief cells. Okay, so these cells are very, very special because on their apical side, they have a special kind of an enzyme which is known as a proton pump, which is actually a hydrogen ion and potassium ATPase, which actually pumps the protons out, and potassium is taken inside the cells. The parietal cells also have another very important enzyme, and that's known as carbonic anhydrase, which combines the carbon dioxide which the cells produce as a byproduct of the metabolism, and plus water to give you what is known as carbonic acid. Then the carbonic acid is a weak acid, and it dissociates into bicarbonate ions and protons, which are then pumped out through with the use of proton potassium pump. This pump is what you can think about. Is it a sympod pump or it is an antipode pump? Okay. At the same time, chloride from the extracellular matrix or interstitial fluid is then transported uh, inside the cell with the bicarbonate. So one negative goes into the blood and the other one, chloride, comes into the cell, and then it is transported to the lumen of the stomach, where proton and H plus and chloride negative, they combine together to give you HCl. Since we are pushing more and more bicarbonate into the blood, so the blood capillaries become more alkaline in nature, so their pH actually goes high. So that thing is known as the alkaline tide. Okay, so as the more acid is produced, the blood capillaries or blood vessels around the stomach are actually, the pH is slightly higher, what is known as an alkaline tide, and this is an important concept, okay, to remember. All right, so let's look at what does regulates the gastric motility and how does the stomach empties itself. Okay, so regulation is done by what we call as receptive relaxation, and also known as the gastric accommodation. Okay, so the stomach actually has only 50 ml volume, which is the empty stomach. But when the food enters into it, it can actually accommodate it and stay stretched. Okay, so it can accommodate incoming food, and as we mentioned earlier, that it can actually hold up to 4 liters, which is a little bit more than a gallon. Okay, so typically the pressure inside the stomach doesn't change. Okay, it is kept constant until 1.5 liters of the food is already entered into the stomach. Okay, and this is maintained by what we call as a receptive relaxation, and this is a reflex mediated, and it is controlled by the nerves which are present in our brain stem. Second thing which helps to the stomach to actually expand and help in its motility as well as its emptying is plasticity, means it's a stress and relaxation response of the smooth muscle cells present inside the stomach walls. So let's look at the gastric contractility activity. How does the stomach moves? Where does the peristalsis contractions start? So typically they move towards the pylorus, which is this region here, at a rate of approximately 3 contractions per minute. Okay, and they are triggered from pacemaker cells, which are present in those plexus which we talked about earlier, which is the submucosal plexus as well as the myenteric plexus. So part of it is the local pacemakers starts do that, and they are the ones which set up what is known as the basic electric rhythm. Okay, so those enteric pacemaker cells, sometimes these pacemaker cells in old books are also known as interstitial cells of Cajal. Okay, and these pacemaker cells are linked together. Remember, these are neurons. They will be linked through wide gap junctions, and they are present. They're gonna make the whole muscularis, entire muscularis, to contract. Okay, as the stomach becomes more larger when the food enters into it, the distension, the mechanical stimulation starts secretion of the gastrin. Okay, so as the gastrin will increase and the distension will increase, that actually increases the force of the contraction. So the contraction starts from the pylor, from the uh, top portion, uh, and from where what we call as um, the fundus, and then they move more stronger towards the bottom portion, which is the pyloric region. Okay, so chyme then is delivered inside the duodenum. So typically is delivered around 3 ml per little squirets. It's not like the whole stomach will empty unless there are some poisons, toxins present in the system which can open up the sphincter. Okay, so a tiny bit portion is moved forward, the rest goes around into circles, and that helps to make it more mixed with gastric juices, etc. So let's look at this. So the first one is the propulsion. The peristaltic wave will move towards the pylorus. Then part of it goes, a slight opening of the pyloric valve occurs, and then the more vigorous this movement occurs, which is the grinding, then the more you will have kind of a stomach acting as a pump to mix things together, and then retropulsion. So once they mix, them all move towards this side, the pyloric, and then it moves backwards towards upwards, what is known as the retropulsion. So the stomach keeps the food for 3 to 4 hours after a meal. Okay, after every 4 hours the stomach becomes empty. That's how we can also connect that some people get hungry around after 4 hours, that you have to take a little bit snacks, etc. Now let's look at what regulates the gastric emptying. Okay, so as the chyme enters into the duodenum, now the receptors inside the duodenum are going to stretch, and the chemical chemoreceptors will detect low pH and etc. So then we have what we call as the enterogastric reflux or enterogastrons. They will inhibit the production of the secretin, gastric secretions, and also the duodenal filling. Okay, so what factors affect this? So if the food is carbohydrate rich, and it will move very fast through the duodenum, and if it is a fatty rich, that then it will stay in the duodenum for a long time, approximately 6 hours or more. And that's why sometimes if we eat too much fried food, it is hard for us to digest. So it's all depending upon what kind of food you are eating. If you eat carbohydrates, you get hungry very fast also. Okay, so let's look at this. So the presence of the fatty or hypertonic or acidic chyme in the duodenum. So that your duodenal enteroendocrine cells will produce enterogastrons. The enterogastrons is a word we use for secretin and cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin and secretin will inhibit then the contractility force of the stomach, as well as the rate at which the stomach is going to empty. So they're going to decrease that. The chemoreceptors will also trigger what is known as enterogastric reflex, a short reflex which is through the enteric neurons, and the longer is going to be through your central nervous system, and it increases the sympathetic activity or decreases the parasympathetic activity. Now let's look at the small intestine and its gross anatomy. So small intestine is one of the major organ for digestion as well as absorption. It is pretty long, but it is packed in a small space, and it is 2 to 4 meters long, and it starts from the pyloric sphincter to the ileocecal valve. So pyloric sphincter is right here, and the ileocecal valve is right here. Okay, so that's where it joins there. It has 3 parts to it. One is the duodenum. So the duodenum actually goes backwards posteriorly, and it is the retroperitoneal structure. Then the second is the jejunum, which is also attached by the mesentery, which is present towards the posterior side, which is attached to your dorsal wall of the abdominal cavity. And then we have the ileum, which is also attached posteriorly to the dorsal wall by the mesentery. So 3 parts: duodenum, jejunum, and then ileum. So the duodenum actually is a C-shaped structure. So it curves around the head of the pancreas, and it is pretty small. It is only 25 centimeters. And in the duodenum region, we do have a bile duct coming in from the liver, and also the main pancreatic duct. So this is the pancreas. This is the head of the pancreas. That's the tail of the pancreas. And the pancreas has 2 major ducts, which collects all the enzymes it produces as an exocrine gland. So one is the main pancreatic duct, and then we also have the accessory pancreatic duct. The accessory pancreatic duct has its own opening in the duodenum. The main pancreatic duct comes and combines with the bile duct, and then they are held together into a little ampulla formation, what is known as hepatopancreatic ampulla, and there is a control sphincter there, which is the sphincter, and they open up into the middle of the duodenum onto a raised area, what is known as the duodenal papilla. Okay, so mix of both bile as well as the pancreatic juice comes into the duodenum. So the pancreatic juices are alkaline in nature. So when the acid from the stomach comes in here, they actually neutralizes the pH here. Okay. Jejunum and ileum. Okay, so the jejunum extends from the duodenum to the ileum, and it's approximately 2.5 meter long, and the ileum is the last portion, which then joins the large intestine at the ileocecal valve, and this can be approximately 3.6 meter long. Let's look at the structural modifications which we see in the small intestine, because small intestine's major function is for absorption of the food. Okay, to increase the surface area, the inside of the lumen of the small intestine actually have circular folds. So it's like the cloth folding into a smaller space, and they have those circular folds, plus they also have lots and lots of villi present. Okay, and then the cells also have microvilli. So these finger-like positions are the villi, and then we have the microvilli present. The circular folds are also known as placi circularis. Okay, so what is this circular folds? So the placi circularis is a permanent fold which is approximately 1 centimeter in deep. And what does it do? So it's kind of forms these grooves that forces the chyme to slowly spiral through the lumen, and then it enhances the more increase in the nutrient absorption. Okay, and then the villi, which is there, are like this. They are approximately 1 mm, and these are mucosal, and they have a lot of capillaries in them. So they have blood capillaries, and then they also have the venous, and then in the middle is the lymph. So the lymphatic vessels here, we call them as is lacteals. Okay, so that lymphatic vessel, present in the villus, is the lacteals, because they are the ones which are gonna carry all the lipids, absorbed lipids. And then each cell on itself, which is lining these villus, has further brush border, which is we call as a microvilli, to increase more absorptive surface. Okay, so the microvilli, or the brush border side, they contain enzymes which can actually help uh, to digest carbohydrates as well as proteins in there. Okay, so the intestinal crypts which are there are, we call them, they also have, okay, so their cells are constantly being renewed every 2 to 4 days. Okay, so the cells which are present in the intestinal, these villi or crypts, etc., is of different types. Okay, so they produce what we call as together as intestinal juices. Okay, so there are enteroendocrine cells which will produce what we call as enterogastron hormones. Do you guys recall it? Very good. It's a secretin as well as cholecystokinin. Okay, and then we also have MALT, mucosal associated lymphoid tissue. So some lymphocytes will be there too. Always we call them intraepithelial lymphocytes, or IELs. So intraepithelial cells are constantly monitored for any bacteria, etc. Then we have Paneth cells, these ones. So the Paneth cells are actually ones which secrete antimicrobial agents. These are your defensins and lysozymes. And then we also have some stem cells present at the base. So those stem cells can then change into any cryptic cells, which is the crypts, intestinal crypts are present like this. Okay. Looking at the mucosa, which is present in the intestine too, is going to be again epithelium cells. These are columnar epithelium cells, and we'll also have Peyer's patches in there, which we already discussed about there. And then there are B lymphocytes, which can actually leave the intestine and then they can enter the blood. Cytotoxic T cells also get activated there. And then B cells can produce IgA, which is produced and mixed with the intestinal juices, and that can also, if there's any bacteria, can neutralize it by agglutination, etc. We also have in the duodenal region, we have special kind of cells which are known as the Brunner's glands, and they can produce more alkaline mucus so that we can actually neutralize the acid chyme. Okay, what exactly is in the intestinal uh, juice? So it's typically 1 to 2 liters. It's slightly alkaline in nature. It has the same isotonic concentration as that of the blood plasma. It is typically mostly water. There are enzymes, very few enzymes, because the most of the enzymes are present on the brush border. They are present in the membranes of these cells. Okay, so enzymes are not secreted out. So because the cells have a lot of microvilli, and then on top of it we have villus, that helps to absorb material. Okay. One of the homeostatic imbalance which we see with stomach is vomiting. Okay, are also known as emesis. Okay, so this can be caused by an extreme stretching. Could be irritants present, which is the bacterial toxins. Excessive alcohol can do that. So those chemical receptors, when they detect that, actually trigger and they send the impulses to the emetic center in the medulla, and then the stomach just contracts very fast and emits everything outwards. Okay, so it's just pushing it outwards. Uh, Excessive vomiting can lead to dehydration as well as electrolyte and acid-base imbalances. The intestinal imbalances which can happen if you have a condition like a chemotherapy uh, for cancer treatments, because cancer treatments or chemotherapy treatments typically target actively dividing cells, and as we mentioned that in the crypts of the intestine the cells are changed every 3 to 4 days, so those cells do not get renewed, they die, and that's why chemotherapy has side effects. People will have vomiting, nausea, diarrhea, etc.